This is it, she thought. The unknown, the unimaginable, was now within her grasp. As she sat there, frozen in the excitement of it all, the doors to the monitoring room whooshed open, breaking her concentration. Commander Axel Brightclaw, the ship's commanding officer, strode in with his usual dramatic flair, his head crests glinting under the ship's lights. As he approached, Nova quickly composed herself and showed him the data. The look of disbelief on Brightclaw's face told her that he was struggling to comprehend what was happening just as much as she had. It was hard to blame him. Human ships were nothing more than fairy tales in the galactic community, stories passed down through generations to scare children. But here it was, plain as day. Human technology, real and undeniable. Nova couldn't help but smile despite herself. The anticipation of the discovery buzzed through her like a live wire. The question of whether the myths were true or just stories was no longer a question at all. Humans were real, and they were out there, waiting for them to make contact. For the first time in what felt like forever, Nova was excited. She had spent so long looking at nothing, only to now be on the brink of something that could change everything. This wasn't just another day in deep space. It was the beginning of history. The hum of the celestial seeker seemed louder now, vibrating with an energy that hadn't been present just hours before. As Nova sat at the console, her excitement couldn't be contained. The discovery was too big, too impossible, and yet the data was undeniable. The entire crew buzzed with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. This was it, the moment that would define their entire mission, the moment that would forever change the galaxy. The idea that humans long thought to be myth were real was almost too extraordinary to grasp. Commander Axel Brightclaw stood at the helm of the ship's command center, his ceremonial head crests raised to their highest point, a visual sign of his seriousness. The usual swagger in his movements was replaced by the tension of the unknown. His usually loud voice was quieter now, his tone carrying a weight of both excitement and caution. The crew had already been briefed, but as he glanced around the room, he could feel the energy in the air, the palpable realization that history was unfolding right before their eyes. The Celestial Seeker's AI confirmed it over and over again. The human vessel wasn't just a passing anomaly. The ship was real. A human ship had been detected, and they had responded to their hail. The humans weren't just a ghost in the machine, a fairy tale told by ancient civilizations. They were here, sending a signal, and soon they would meet the crew of the Celestial Seeker face to face. As the crew gathered in the main conference room to prepare for the first official contact, Nova couldn't stop fidgeting with her tentacles, twisting them nervously around her data pad. Her mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next, of the beings she'd only heard about in stories and legends. Humans. Would they be the terrifying monsters that the galaxy feared, or would they surprise them, just like they had already done by responding so quickly, so casually? The conference room was packed, the buzz of excited murmurs filling the air. Crew members exchanged speculative looks, trying to process what was about to happen. Chief Engineer Ryland Sparkforge's crystalline form flickered with anxiety, her usually calm demeanor shaken by the reality of what they were about to face. Security Officer Blake Steelclaw stood stiffly at the back, all four arms crossed, a skeptical expression across his face. Even Dr. Luna Quantum Weaver, the ship's chief xenobiologist, hovered eagerly in her chair, eyes wide with excitement, ready to dive into a cultural exchange with the mysterious human species. Nova watched as Commander Brightclaw made his way to the front of the room, his voice booming, cutting through the chatter like a blade. His announcement was simple yet profound. The signal we've received, the ship we've detected, everything matches the theoretical models we have for human technology. And the humans have responded to our hails. They want to establish contact. The room fell silent. A stunned, collective gasp filled the air as the crew absorbed the weight of what had just been said. For a moment, it seemed impossible. After all the stories, all the warnings about the dangers of humans, could it really be true? Were they truly about to make contact with a species that had been relegated to myth? Impossible, Sparkforge muttered under her breath, her crystalline structure flickering with confusion. Humans are just stories. You're telling me we've been chasing shadows all these years? Before anyone could respond, Dr. Quantum Weaver, ever the optimist, floated forward, her chair bobbing gently. Well, there is substantial evidence, even from our earliest records, that suggests humans may be more than just legends. There are consistent descriptions across various species folklore that align with what we're seeing in these readings. You're telling me we've been chasing fairy tales all along? Steelclaw said with a raised eyebrow. And now we're about to meet them? What's next, a real-life space chicken? Nova couldn't help but let out a quiet chuckle. The skepticism was real, but the excitement was too. Everyone in the room was on edge, caught between disbelief and anticipation. This wasn't just any first contact. This was humanity, a species that had been reduced to nothing more than a myth, yet here they were, on the brink of becoming a reality. Commander Brightclaw raised his hands, a signal for silence. His crests rippled, a sign of both his growing excitement and his need to keep the crew focused. We need to proceed with caution. If these humans are truly as dangerous as the stories say, we need to be prepared. We've all heard the rumors about their death world, their survival instincts, their coffee. He paused, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more thoughtful. But remember, if they wanted to harm us, why would they respond diplomatically? Why not just show us their power? His crests flared, signaling his conviction.
No.
I believe this is a historic opportunity. We could learn more about them than we ever thought possible, and we could forge a new path forward for the galaxy. He took a breath. We're about to make history. Let's make sure we're ready for it. Nova's heart raced. She had been so used to the cold emptiness of space, to the quiet, predictable routine of deep space monitoring. But now, the weight of the moment pressed on her. This was more than just an alien species. This was humanity, alive, real, and about to make their first appearance on the galactic stage. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of species they really were. Were they the brutal, dangerous creatures the legends painted them to be, or were they something more? As the crew moved into position to prepare for the communication with the human ship, Nova couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something incredible, something that would change the course of history forever. She felt a rush of anticipation mixed with a healthy dose of uncertainty. The next few moments would define their future, and she couldn't help but wonder, what would humanity show them? Would it be everything they'd expected, or something entirely different? As the celestial seeker glided through space, heading closer to the human vessel, the crew's anticipation reached a fever pitch. The briefing rooms had cleared, and now everyone had gathered in their assigned positions, preparing for what could only be described as the most important moment in their careers, and in galactic history. The ship was on course for a first contact with a species that had been nothing more than a collection of myths, ancient stories passed down over generations. And now, here they were, moving steadily toward the truth. Nova sat at her console, her tentacles fidgeting nervously. She couldn't shake the thoughts racing through her mind. What would they be like? The humans. The stories she'd heard were filled with terrifying tales of beings who could survive the most hostile environments, who thrived on worlds others would find uninhabitable. Legends of death worlds. Of creatures who drank lethal stimulants just to stay awake longer. But what if those stories were wrong? What if humanity wasn't what the galaxy thought they were? Commander Brightclaw's voice snapped her from her thoughts. We're nearing the human vessel. Get ready, everyone. First contact in 5 minutes. His tone was crisp, yet there was an edge of excitement beneath his usual commanding presence. Even he couldn't ignore the monumental nature of this moment. The Terra Venture, the human ship, loomed large on the view screen, and Nova couldn't help but feel a flutter of awe. It was sleek, elegant, and yet there was a certain intimidating presence to it. The legends of human technology had prepared her for something different, something raw and primitive, something dangerous. But this ship looked like a work of art. It was a marvel of engineering, graceful and powerful, with an almost serene quality that didn't match the terrifying reputation of its creators. As the distance between the two ships closed, the tension in the air grew thick. Everyone on the Celestial Seeker was on edge, but Nova couldn't deny the thrill that buzzed through her. She was about to meet the species that had captured the galaxy's imagination for centuries, and she had no idea what to expect. The human vessel's readings were unlike anything they had ever encountered. The energy signatures were confusing. There was an almost chaotic level of power cycling through their systems, but it wasn't the way that the Seeker's engines hummed. No, this was different. It was more controlled, more refined. And the gravity. Nova had felt the slight tug of artificial gravity shift as they drew closer, but this wasn't the standard gravity manipulation they had learned to expect. The human ship systems seemed to fluctuate between levels, as if their environment was constantly adjusting itself to suit its occupants. "Commander, their energy readings." Nova started, but Brightclaw cut her off. "Yes, I see it," he said, his crests rippling with curiosity. "Their power output isn't following any known pattern. This is something new." As the Celestial Seeker began its approach to the human ship, the AI's voice cut through the tension, reporting the status of the docking procedure. "Warning. Human ship's energy signatures fluctuating. Approach vector unstable." Nova couldn't help but watch in amazement as the Terra Venture executed a flawless spiral maneuver around the Seeker, maintaining the same relative position while completing a full orbit in under 10 seconds. The human ship moved like liquid, graceful and precise, its speed and agility defying all logic. The crew watched in stunned silence as the human ship returned to its original position, as if nothing had happened. Sparkforge, the usually unshakable chief engineer, let out a sound of awe. That shouldn't be possible. Their ship just defied the laws of physics. Nova's mind raced to keep up with the display. What kind of species could control their ship like this? What kind of technology allowed them to move so fluidly through space? These were the same beings who were rumored to be capable of surviving in the harshest environments known to any species, who could bend the very fabric of the universe around them. But this was something different. It wasn't brutality. It wasn't survival at all costs. It was something far more sophisticated, more deliberate. Humans had mastered their world in ways that no one had even thought possible, turning the seemingly impossible into the everyday. As the ships continued their approach, Nova's mind was filled with questions. How could they do all of this? How had humanity evolved on a world so hostile, so dangerous, and yet come out of it with technology that could potentially revolutionize the galaxy? The docking bay doors slid open, and the crew braced themselves. A final transmission from the human ship arrived, offering the crew of the Celestial Seeker their docking preferences. The humans had adjusted their environment to accommodate the crew, lowering their gravity levels to make it easier for the aliens to breathe, walk, and exist in their ship. But there was a peculiar detail in the message. They asked if any of the crew had allergies or dietary restrictions, preparing for the possibility of offering refreshments once they met. That's odd, Nova thought aloud. They're offering us food? After everything we've heard about their world, and they want to adjust for us? It didn't make sense. The human world was supposed to be a deadly, inhospitable place. How could they be so hospitable? It was like the universe had turned its myths on their head. Where were the terrifying, unrelenting creatures that could survive on a death world? Where was the savage warrior culture, ready to conquer all in their path? Instead, they had found a species that had learned to live with their dangerous environment, to control it, to manipulate it for their own benefit. This wasn't a species that lived to survive. They lived to thrive. The Celestial Seeker began its final approach to the Terra Venture. Nova felt her tentacles tremble with anticipation, the weight of the moment pressing on her. This wasn't just a first contact. This was the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history. They were no longer speaking to a myth. They were about to speak to the humans, beings who had turned their harsh world into a playground, who had mastered challenges that others couldn't even begin to comprehend. And Nova was about to meet them. As the Celestial Seeker and the Terra Venture drew closer, the air on the command deck of the Seeker became thick with anticipation. Nova, who had once been so accustomed to the silence of space, now found herself on the edge of history. The human ship, sleek and formidable, filled the view screen with its elegant presence. Despite its intimidating size, there was something almost serene about it. It moved with an ease that belied the violent, hostile environment from which it had originated. The legends had painted a picture of humans as brutal survivors, beings who could endure any challenge. Yet the ship before them suggested something altogether different. The crew braced for the impending first contact. Nova, her tentacles twitching in nervous anticipation, couldn't help but wonder what awaited them. Would the humans live up to their myths, or would they defy every expectation and show the galaxy a completely new face? As the docking procedure commenced, Nova's thoughts raced. These were the same beings whose myths spoke of thriving in environments where others would perish. Yet here they were, in front of her, poised for a meeting that would reveal the truth. Commander Brightclaw's crests flickered with tension as he gave final orders for the docking. Prepare to make contact. We have no idea what to expect, but remember, we're here to learn, not to judge. His tone was sharp, but there was an underlying current of excitement in his voice. It was clear that even he, with all his years of service, had never been so exhilarated by an assignment. This was more than a diplomatic mission. It was an unveiling of a species long believed to be nothing more than stories. The Terra Venture's docking bay doors slid open, and there, standing at the entrance, was Captain Alexandra Chin. She wore no protective gear, unlike the crew of the Celestial Seeker, whose environmental suits seemed out of place against the relaxed atmosphere around her. Nova's third eye widened in surprise as she observed the human captain, wondering how she could stand so confidently in such a dangerous environment without so much as a hint of discomfort. Captain Chen's expression was calm, her smile genuine. She didn't seem like a warrior, as the legends had suggested. She didn't look like a creature born from a death world, ready to conquer the stars. Instead, she looked like someone who had mastered the art of survival, not through brute force, but through understanding, control, and intelligence. "Welcome aboard the Terra Venture," Captain Chen said, her voice warm, not at all what Nova had expected from a supposedly fearsome race of myth. "We're honored to make your acquaintance." Nova's tentacles froze for a moment. The calmness, the ease of the human captain's demeanor, it was nothing like the terrifying, savage beings described in the old stories. No hulking figures. No warlike tendencies. Instead, there was only this human, a calm, poised, and clearly intelligent individual standing before them. "You're not wearing any protective gear," Nova remarked, her voice catching in her throat. "How is this possible?" Captain Chin chuckled softly. "We can hear you, Lieutenant," she said, her tone light. "And no, we don't need protective gear in our normal environment, though I understand why that might seem strange to you." Nova blinked, stunned. They don't need protective gear. The gravity, the atmosphere, everything about this should have been hostile, dangerous. And yet here stood Captain Chen, perfectly at ease. "Your environment is completely different from ours," Nova ventured, trying to understand. "It is," Captain Chen replied simply. "We've adapted, just as you've adapted to yours. Humans have learned to thrive on our planet, and now we're extending the same hospitality to you." The idea of adaptation wasn't new to Nova, but it had never occurred to her that a species could so completely transform their environment, not by brute force, but by understanding it, by manipulating it to their benefit. The legends spoke of humans as survivors, but this was something else entirely. These weren't just survivors. They were masters of their world, their environment, and their technology. As the Celestial Seeker crew filed into the Terra Venture's conference room, Nova couldn't help but observe the intricacies of the ship. Everything was so carefully designed, so precise. The humans hadn't just survived, they had flourished. The environment wasn't just livable for them. It was designed for comfort and efficiency. The room they were in had been specially modified to accommodate the diverse physiology of the Seeker's crew. It was clear that the humans had thought of everything, and it spoke volumes about their approach to not just survival but to cooperation. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Captain Chin said, gesturing to the chairs, which had been altered to fit the varying forms of the alien species in the room. She moved with ease, as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Nova, still trying to process the enormity of the situation, took a seat, adjusting her tentacles to the new human-friendly configuration. As the rest of the crew settled in, the discussions began. Bright Claw was the first to speak, his voice steady, but filled with curiosity. "Captain Chen, we have many questions. There's been a long-standing belief that humans were nothing more than a myth, a species of terrifying, brutal creatures who survived in ways we couldn't even imagine." Lieutenant Nova Starweave slumped in her seat, her tentacles draped listlessly over the control panel. The vast emptiness of deep space stretched before her, an endless ocean of stars where nothing ever happened. The low hum of the celestial seeker filled the silence, a constant reminder of the unyielding monotony of her assignment. Another day of staring at data screens that presented nothing but the cold, indifferent cosmos. She could feel the weight of endless hours pressing down on her, a boredom so deep it threatened to tear at the very fabric of time and space itself. This was supposed to be an adventurous assignment. Someone had sold it to her that way. Instead, it felt like a cosmic joke. She idly tapped a button on the console, more out of habit than necessity, just to confirm the system was still functional. Space, vast and empty, never seemed to change. For hours, the data rolled across the screens, seemingly endless streams of information, all meaningless, all predictable. She yawned, stifling a long stretch, and half-heartedly glanced over the readings. There was no sense of urgency, no new discoveries. Just the same monotonous reports. Her tentacles drooped with exhaustion. The dull, rhythmic beeping from the console was nearly enough to send her into a deep sleep, but she resisted. She had a job to do, after all. And then something changed. At first, Nova thought it was a glitch. The readings on her screen shifted slightly, but so subtly she wondered if she was imagining it. She wiped her eyes and slapped her face with a tentacle, hoping to clear her mind. When the readings didn't change, she felt a sudden surge of doubt. Had she been staring at the screen for too long? She ran a quick diagnostic check, recalibrating the instruments just to be sure. But the strange anomaly remained. She couldn't ignore it anymore. A signal. A very distinct, very unexpected signal. Her pulse quickened. She had to be hallucinating. There was no way. Nova stared at the data again, this time with focused intensity. The signal pattern was so precise, so unlike anything she'd ever seen. She tapped a few commands into the console to double-check the readings. Still the same anomaly. A match. This couldn't be right. She felt a rush of excitement, mixed with disbelief. She asked the ship's AI to confirm the data, even though she was already certain she knew what it would say. The response came back in the same detached, monotone voice that Nova had heard 1,000 times before, but this time it made her heart skip a beat. The AI confirmed it. The signal matched a theoretical model that had been stored in the archives for eons. A signal of human origin. Human origin. Her mind struggled to process the information. Humans, the species that was said to be a myth, nothing but a collection of fantastical stories. Yet here was the proof, undeniable and clear. Her tentacles twitched nervously across the control panel, gathering more data despite the growing disbelief. Every reading, every pattern confirmed it. A human ship. It couldn't be true. She laughed out loud at the absurdity of it all, her voice cracking slightly with a mix of excitement and skepticism. Humans? Really? She thought, her mind racing. What's next? Are we going to find a unicorn-class starship powered by rainbow dust? But as much as she laughed, the data didn't lie. The signal was real, unmistakably artificial, and it matched every theoretical model they had for human technology. Her third eye widened in shock, her body tingling with excitement. Humans were real. And now, for the first time in history, they were about to make contact. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt, sending a surge of adrenaline through her veins. She quickly pulled up a detailed analysis on the main screen, eager to present her findings. For a fleeting moment, her mind drifted to what might lie ahead. First contact with a species that had been nothing more than a bedtime story for so many in the galaxy. Captain Chen's smile didn't falter. I suppose it's easier to believe in myths than in the reality of what it takes to survive. But that's the thing, Commander. Survival isn't enough. Thriving in the face of adversity is what makes us human. Nova's tentacles quivered with realization. The human species wasn't about sheer power or dominance. It wasn't about conquering the universe. It was about adapting to the impossible and turning it into something that could benefit everyone. This wasn't a brutal species. This was a species that understood the dangers of their world so completely that they had mastered them. What kind of challenges have you faced? Nova asked, unable to keep the curiosity out of her voice. She wanted to understand. She needed to know what kind of species had turned every challenge into an opportunity for growth. Too many to count, Captain Chen said with a chuckle. But we've learned from every single one of them. From survival on our homeworld to the creation of technology that allows us to thrive, it's all about turning the impossible into something we can work with. And we're not the only ones who can benefit from it. The conversations continued, but Nova couldn't focus entirely on the exchange of words. She was still grappling with the realization that humans, whom the galaxy had long feared, were not at all like the brutal, unyielding warriors described in every myth and legend. They were, instead, a species whose greatest strength came from their ability to understand and manipulate their environment, not through force or savagery, but through intelligence, resourcefulness, and cooperation. Captain Chen's presence was calming. She exuded an air of confidence and comfort, like someone who had been through the worst their world had to offer and still emerged with a sense of purpose. Nova watched as she interacted with the crew, easily moving between the different species with grace and ease. Despite all the myths and stories of humans, this was not what she had expected. The humans weren't imposing themselves on the galaxy. They were offering their knowledge, their hospitality, and their innovation. Would you like to see our engineering deck? Captain Chen asked, sensing the crew's wonder at their environment. We've got some fascinating experiments running that you might find useful for your own work. Nova's tentacles trembled slightly at the invitation. A tour of the human ship. Their engineering marvels. The very technology that had allowed them to survive on their brutal world was something she couldn't pass up. She glanced at Commander Brightclaw, who gave a nod, signaling that this would be an opportunity they couldn't miss. The Celestial Seeker crew followed Captain Chen down a series of corridors that seemed to pulse with purpose and efficiency. As they walked, Nova marveled at the sleek design of the ship. Every inch of it had been tailored to function with precision. The walls were lined with materials she had never seen before, metals and composites that appeared too strong, too light to be real. Humans had engineered their surroundings to withstand the unimaginable, and yet they had done so in a way that made the ship feel alive, responsive, even inviting. You've built all of this yourself? Nova couldn't help but ask as they passed an area that appeared to be a high-tech lab. The machines inside were active, humming and clicking as they processed data in real time. We did, Captain Chen replied, her voice tinged with pride. Over the centuries, we've had to adapt and innovate. Our world wasn't always like this. It took time, resources, and a whole lot of trial and error. But we learned from it all. Everything we have today came from overcoming challenges, some of which nearly wiped us out. Her words struck Nova deeply. For the first time, she realized that humanity's journey wasn't about simple survival. It was about learning from hardship, transforming every obstacle into an opportunity for improvement. The more Nova learned about humans, the more she understood that their strength wasn't just in their ability to endure, but in their ability to adapt and grow stronger from adversity. The idea was so simple, so profound, that it almost felt like a revelation. The galactic community had spent so much time trying to survive in the galaxy, but perhaps the real lesson they needed to learn was how to adapt, how to learn from the forces around them, just as humanity had done. If humans could thrive in one of the most dangerous environments known to any species, what could they teach the rest of the galaxy about thriving together? The realization struck Nova like a bolt of lightning. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't just their technology, it was their way of thinking, their ability to embrace challenges and turn them into strengths. And in that moment, she knew that this first contact was just the beginning of something far greater. The galaxy was about to learn that survival wasn't enough. It was adaptation, innovation, and cooperation that would define the future. As the human ship Terra Venture continued to unfold its many wonders to the Celestial Seeker crew, a feeling of awe and admiration permeated the air. Nova, for the first time since her assignment, felt a deep sense of purpose. The myths surrounding humanity had been shattered, and in their place stood a species whose ingenuity and adaptability were beyond anything she had imagined. Humans weren't just survivors. They were innovators, creators, and thinkers who had turned their harsh world into a model for the galaxy. They had made the impossible possible. But amid the fascination, a growing sense of unease lingered. As they moved through the Terra Venture, Nova couldn't help but notice the subtle differences between what she had expected and what she was seeing. Humans weren't just trying to survive in their dangerous environment, they had mastered it. They had learned how to make a world so hostile, so impossible for other species, into something habitable, even enjoyable. The technology they shared, from manipulating gravity to their seamless integration of energy, was nothing short of revolutionary. And yet, something about it unsettled Nova. Captain Chen led them to the ship's central command hub, where the bridge crew was gathered, ready to discuss their next steps. There was a calmness to the crew of the Terra Venture that was almost disarming. They were professionals, poised and focused, and yet there was something distinctly different about them. They seemed to have complete control over their environment, an environment so harsh that the thought of even existing there would send most species running for cover. Humans had adapted to a level of mastery that, to Nova, was both awe-inspiring and slightly intimidating. What did it mean for the galaxy that these beings, who had once been considered mythical, were now an undeniable reality? The meeting began with formal introductions, but Nova's mind wandered as she observed the ease with which the human crew interacted with one another. There was no posturing, no sense of superiority. They spoke to each other like equals, with mutual respect for their capabilities, their skills, and their roles. It wasn't like the hierarchical structures she had seen in other species' cultures. There was no domineering leader, no rigid chain of command. It was a system based on collaboration, on finding the best solution together, no matter who offered it. Then Captain Chen spoke, cutting through Nova's thoughts. "The galaxy is changing, Lieutenant. We are offering something different, an opportunity for everyone to thrive, not just survive. You've seen the technology we've developed, but it's not just about technology. It's about thinking differently." Nova's mind raced. The words hung in the air, but she couldn't quite grasp the full weight of their meaning. Humans didn't just want to survive in the galaxy. They wanted to transform it. They weren't out to conquer others. They weren't aiming to dominate or expand their power. What they sought, it seemed, was to offer a new way of life, a way that embraced innovation, cooperation, and a kind of adaptability that no one had ever seen before. "We've learned from our history," Captain Chen continued, "and we want to share that with others. We've spent centuries mastering our environment, and now we're ready to help others do the same." Nova felt a sudden chill. Was this a warning or an invitation? The realization struck her like a thunderclap. Humans weren't just sharing their technology, they were offering a philosophy, a way of thinking, a way of life that could challenge everything the galaxy had known. The hierarchical, rigid systems that had governed the galaxy for millennia might not be enough in the face of humanity's adaptive approach to survival. Humans had proven that they could thrive anywhere, even in the most dangerous environments. They had made the impossible possible. But what would happen if they turned that same mindset to the galaxy at large? Would they be a force for good, or would their need for constant innovation push them to disrupt everything around them? The question swirled in Nova's mind as she listened to the rest of the meeting. Humans spoke of unity, cooperation, and progress, but Nova couldn't shake the feeling that these were more than just ideals. They were the foundation of something far larger, far more significant than anyone realized. Humanity's reach was just beginning to extend beyond their homeworld, and it wasn't just their technology that would shape the future, it was their mindset. They weren't just offering solutions. They were changing the very fabric of how species interacted, how they adapted, how they thrived. As the meeting came to a close, Nova stood, her tentacles curling with uncertainty. She had come here to learn about humans, to understand what made them tick. But now she realized she was part of something much larger. The galaxy was at a crossroads, and humanity's entrance into the galactic community was more than just a historic event. It was a turning point, a moment that would define the future for generations to come. The air inside the Terra Venture had changed. What had started as awe and wonder was now an undercurrent of uncertainty. The Celestial Seeker's crew had spent hours absorbing every detail of the human ship, marveling at their technology and ingenuity. But something lingered at the back of Nova's mind. Humans weren't just different, they were disruptive. And not just in terms of their technology, but in their very philosophy, their way of thinking, their approach to life and survival could change everything. And that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Captain Chen had given them a glimpse into humanity's mindset, the drive for progress, the constant push to turn challenges into opportunities. But Nova wasn't sure the galaxy was ready for it. In their centuries of exploration, the galaxy had built itself around tradition, hierarchy, and balance. Humanity, it seemed, was about to turn all of that on its head. As the Celestial Seeker's crew made their way back to their ship, Nova couldn't shake the feeling that everything was on the cusp of changing forever. She had learned more about humanity in a few hours than she had in a lifetime of studies. But the more she learned, the more she realized just how little they understood. What did it mean to truly thrive? Was it just about survival, or was there something deeper at play? Humans had mastered their world in ways no one had ever thought possible. But now, as they stood on the precipice of this new chapter in galactic history, Nova couldn't help but wonder, what would their success mean for everyone else? The crew of the Celestial Seeker had made contact with the humans, but they were still standing on the edge, unsure of what lay beyond. They had seen the potential, the vision humanity had for a future where cooperation and innovation were the keys to survival. But there was still the question of how this would affect the established order of the galaxy. Would other species embrace this new way of thinking, or would they resist, fearing the unknown? The decision, Nova realized, was no longer up to just the humans. It was up to the galaxy as a whole. The invitation had been extended, but would anyone accept it? Back aboard the Seeker, Nova joined the rest of the command crew in the briefing room. Bright Claw stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence tempered by the gravity of the situation. His crests were flickering with uncertainty, a rare sign of doubt. "We've seen their technology. We've heard their ideals," he began, his voice steady but thoughtful. "But I think the most important thing we've learned is that humanity's way of thinking isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. We've been conditioned to look at survival as the ultimate goal. But what if we're missing something? What if humanity is showing us a new way of life that we didn't even know was possible?" Nova watched as the crew exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of awe and apprehension. It was clear that the meeting with the humans had shaken them all in different ways. They had come to learn about humans, but they had left with something far more significant, a glimpse into a future that was, quite frankly, unknown. "And that's where the real challenge lies," Bright Claw continued. "If we accept their invitation, we will have to change. The galaxy will have to change. Our entire approach to how we govern, how we interact, how we see ourselves will be tested. And not everyone will be ready for that." The room was silent as the implications of Bright Claw's words settled over the crew. They had always been taught that survival came first, but humanity had found a way to turn survival into something greater. They had found a way to take the challenges of their world, gravity, toxicity, hostile environments, and make them work for them. And now they were offering that same way of thinking to the galaxy. Could the galaxy adapt to such a shift? Dr. Quantum Weaver was the first to speak, her voice full of excitement. "The possibilities are endless. Humans have done what many of us believed impossible. If we collaborate, if we share knowledge, think of what we could achieve together. The universe could become a place where every species thrives, not just survives." But Sparkforge, the chief engineer, seemed less optimistic. Her crystalline form flickered with unease. "That's the problem, isn't it? We've always been cautious. We've built our societies on rules, on structures that protect us from chaos. And now humans are asking us to throw all of that away. What if they're asking too much? What if their way of thinking is too disruptive for the galaxy to handle? Nova felt a wave of unease wash over her. She understood both sides of the argument. Humanity's vision was bold, but it was also dangerous. Change was never easy, and not every species would welcome the kind of disruption humanity represented. It wasn't just about technology, it was about rethinking everything. The way species interacted, the way they governed, the way they survived. As the meeting progressed, Nova's mind kept returning to one thought. Humanity had shown them a new way of life, one that was built on adapting to challenges rather than fighting them. But was that really the answer for the galaxy? Or would the galaxy resist, clinging to old ways that had worked for millennia? The answer, Nova realized, was that they didn't know yet. They were on the brink of something huge, something transformative. The humans had given them a taste of what was possible, but whether or not the galaxy was ready for that change remained uncertain. Steelclaw, who had been silent throughout most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "I don't trust it," he said bluntly, his forearms crossed. "Everything we've heard about humans, the death world, the impossible survival, it all sounds too good to be true. What if this is just the beginning? What if they're showing us their best face now, but once we let them in, they change the game entirely?" "That's a fair concern," Brightclaw acknowledged. "But consider this. They've had every opportunity to demonstrate aggression, to show dominance. Instead, they've shown hospitality. They've adjusted their environment for us. They've offered food, knowledge, cooperation. Does that sound like a species planning conquest?" Or, Steelclaw countered, "It sounds like a species that's very, very good at strategy." Nova found herself considering both perspectives. The humans had indeed been remarkably accommodating, but Steelclaw's skepticism wasn't entirely unfounded. Throughout galactic history, first contacts had gone wrong before. Species that seemed peaceful had turned out to have hidden agendas. But something about the humans felt different. The way Captain Chin spoke, the way she carried herself, there was an authenticity there that was hard to fake. "I think," Nova said slowly, surprising herself by speaking up, "that we need to consider what we've actually observed, not just what we feared. Yes, humans come from a death world. Yes, their capabilities are beyond what we thought possible. But every single action they've taken has been to bridge the gap between us, not to widen it. They've made themselves vulnerable by inviting us aboard. They've shared their technology freely. They've asked about our dietary needs, for Star's sake." A ripple of tentative laughter moved through the room. "Lieutenant Starweave makes a good point," Quantum Weaver added. "Scientific method demands we base our conclusions on evidence, not preconception. And all the evidence suggests that humans are exactly what they appear to be, a species that has learned to thrive through cooperation and innovation, and who wish to share that knowledge. But at what cost?" Sparkforge pressed. "If we adopt their methods, their technology, their way of thinking, do we lose ourselves in the process? Do we become human?" The question hung in the air, heavy and complex. It was, Nova realized, the heart of the matter. This wasn't just about first contact or diplomatic relations. This was about identity, about what it meant to be who they were as individual species and as a galactic community. Brightclaw's crests rippled thoughtfully. "I don't think they're asking us to become human," he said finally. "I think they're asking us to become more than what we are now.
To grow.
To adapt. Isn't that what evolution is about? Isn't that what we claim to value as explorers and scientists?" Nova felt something shift inside her. He was right. The entire reason she had joined the Celestial Seeker was to discover, to learn, to push boundaries. And here, right in front of them, was the greatest discovery of their lifetimes. Not just a new species, but a new way of thinking about existence itself. "So, what do?" she asked quietly. Brightclaw looked around the room, meeting each crew member's eyes in turn. "We do what we came here to do. We learn. We observe. We engage with an open mind and a cautious heart. And then we report back to the Galactic Council and let them decide how to proceed. But I, for one, believe this is an opportunity we cannot afford to miss." As the crew continued to debate and discuss, Nova found her thoughts drifting back to Captain Chen's words. Thriving in the face of adversity is what makes us human. Perhaps, she thought, thriving in the face of the unknown was what would define all of them, human and alien alike, in the days to come. The meeting eventually adjourned, but Nova knew that the real conversations were only just beginning. Throughout the ship, in mess halls and quarters, crew members would be discussing what they'd seen, what it meant, what it could mean for their future. As Nova made her way back to her station, she paused by a viewport, looking out at the Terra Venture floating gracefully beside them. The human ship gleamed in the starlight, a testament to what was possible when a species refused to be limited by their circumstances. For the first time in her career, Nova felt truly alive. The boredom, the monotony, the endless hours of staring at empty space, all of it had led to this moment. And whatever came next, whatever challenges or changes humanity brought to the galaxy, she knew one thing for certain. The universe would never be the same again. And perhaps, she thought with a slight curl of her tentacles that might have been a smile, that was exactly what they all needed. The following morning, if such a term could be applied in the timelessness of deep space, Nova found herself back at her console, but everything felt different. The same screens that had once displayed nothing but monotonous data now seemed alive with possibility. Every reading, every sensor sweep carried the weight of potential discovery. She was reviewing the data they'd collected from the Terra Venture when a priority message pinged on her console. It was from Captain Chen, requesting a private communication channel with her specifically. Nova's tentacles trembled slightly as she accepted the call. Captain Chen's face appeared on the screen, that same warm, genuine smile in place. "Lieutenant Starweave, I hope I'm not interrupting anything crucial." "Not at all, Captain," Nova replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "How can I help you?" "Actually, I was hoping to ask you something," Chen said, leaning forward slightly. "During our tour yesterday, I noticed you asked more questions than anyone else. You seemed genuinely curious about not just what we've built, but why we built it, how we think about problems. That kind of intellectual curiosity is rare, even among scientists." Nova felt a flush of pride ripple through her chromatic skin. "I suppose I've always believed that understanding the why is more important than just knowing the what. Technology is just tools. It's the thinking behind it that matters." Exactly. Chen's enthusiasm was infectious. "That's precisely the kind of perspective we need. Lieutenant, I want to propose something unusual. How would you feel about an exchange program? You spend some time aboard the Terra Venture, learning our methods, our approach to problem solving. And in return, we'd send one of our crew to the Seeker to learn from you." Nova's hearts, both of them, began racing. "An exchange program? That's unprecedented. I don't even know if Command would approve such a thing." "Which is why I'm asking you first," Chen said. "If you're not interested, there's no point in pursuing it through official channels. But I think this could be the beginning of something extraordinary. Not just sharing technology, but sharing perspectives, ways of thinking, ways of being." Nova found herself nodding before she'd fully processed the implications. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'm interested. Very interested." Chen's smile widened. "Excellent. I'll prepare a formal proposal for Commander Brightclaw. But Nova, may I call you Nova?" "Of course." "Nova, I want you to understand something. This won't be easy. You'll be challenged in ways you can't imagine. You'll question things you've always taken for granted. You might even find yourself changing in ways that make you uncomfortable. Are you prepared for that?" Nova thought about the endless hours she'd spent in this chair, staring at empty space, waiting for something, anything, to happen. She thought about the boredom that had threatened to consume her, the feeling that life was passing her by while she watched from a distance. "Captain Chen," she said firmly, "I've been waiting my entire life for something like this." "I'm ready." "Good," Chen replied, "because the galaxy is about to change, Nova. And I have a feeling you're going to be right at the center of it." After the call ended, Nova sat in silence, her tentacles wrapped around herself in a gesture of both excitement and trepidation. She had no idea what she'd just agreed to, not really. But for the first time since joining the Celestial Seeker, she felt like she was truly part of something meaningful. Behind her, the door whooshed open. She turned to find Commander Brightclaw standing there, his crests raised in what she recognized as approval. "I was monitoring the communication," he said without preamble. "Captain Chin copied me on her proposal. I'm approving it, Lieutenant. You'll be our first cultural exchange officer with humanity." "Sir, I thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Brightclaw said, moving to stand beside her console. "You know what this means, don't you? You're not just representing yourself anymore. You're representing all of us, the entire galactic community. What you learn, how you adapt, the relationships you build, it will set the template for how we interact with humanity going forward." The weight of responsibility settled over Nova like a physical thing, but instead of feeling crushing, it felt right. This was what she'd been meant for. Not monitoring empty space, but bridging the gap between worlds, between species, between different ways of thinking. "I understand, Commander," she said. "And I'm ready." As Brightclaw left the room, Nova turned back to her console, but her mind was already aboard the Terra Venture, already imagining what she would learn, what she would discover, what she would become. The myths had been shattered. The truth had been revealed. And now, the real adventure was about to begin.